Hello, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us for this LabStats Tech Talk. I'm Derrick, Technical Support Specialist here at LabStats, and this is John, our Product Manager. So today we're going to be here talking about how to stop guessing and start using more data in our decision-making process. And if you have any questions as we go, please put them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the discussion here. So to start, let's first unpack what LabStats is. In your words, John, how would you describe LabStats?
Sure. LabStats is a data and collection tool, data collection and reporting tool that collects on the information on computers. So when computers are turned on and off, what software is being run, what users are running them.
And who's using them as well?
Yeah, what users are running them for sure. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We'll get into more of that soon, but before we do, I'd like to ask what's so bad or dangerous about guessing? Is it always bad?
So we're always guessing. We can just guess better or worse. So you're always constrained by time and resources. You're constrained by how much information you can handle. You're constrained by how much time and effort you can put into something. So you're never going to know exactly everything you want to know. In statistics, they say all models are wrong. Some models are useful.
Okay.
To build a useful model, you've got to try to understand what you're doing, and you put more and more information into it, more and more data points to a point to get better at it.
To the point where there's value.
Yeah, and generally speaking, the more data there is in your model, the more data your model incorporates, the more useful it's going to be for you, the more accurate.
Okay. So the balance then is how long do I have to make this decision, and how much resources can I afford to put into gathering data versus when do I need to have a decision made by?
And that's all about how costly is this decision.
Okay. And so if guessing is less than ideal, then how do we get around it? What do we do in order to approach our work in a more data-oriented fashion?
Sure. You have to have the data. That's the first thing. So you have to be collecting. If you want to make good decisions about how many computers should I have, or where should they be located, or how much software we should be paying for, or how many lab attendants should we employ, you have to know how they're being used now, what's being used now. And so you have to collect the data. And so LabStats is pretty straightforward, for example, is pretty straightforward in set it up, turn it on, collect it, and then you have to put in ongoing work.
Yeah, it takes a bit of effort initially to get it set up and running.
Yeah, it's 15, 20 minutes, something like that. But then putting in the ongoing 1 or 2, 3 or 4 minutes every time you move a computer, every time you change a lab around, to keep that updated.
So you have to keep your data set clean in order to make conclusions.
Yeah, and that's the difference between people who are able to use the product successfully, the tools successfully, and those aren't, is the couple minutes every time you actually change something physically in your environment. Make sure LabStats knows that. Okay.
And then LabFind can be helpful with that too, by associating addresses and things with specific locations.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the ability, now that we've added a LabFind, we have a much more robust understanding of your actual physical space. So where are your machines, your software, your users in space? We're doing that by associating an address and a GPS location with every station, with every group.
Okay.
Yeah.
And once you're collecting data, the next step is?
You got the data, then you have to understand what we can use this data for. What is our institution's goals? What do they want to get done? Data has no value on its own. Data is a tool to be used to accomplish some other goal.
In context.
In context. And so I really recommend people once they've got the data collecting, start by going out and looking for conflict. What are the decisions that are really hard that turn into nasty arguments? What are the conversations we're not even having anymore because the last 5 times we had them, they turned into stalemates?
Well, because everybody's viewpoint is different, right? Everybody's got a different worldview. Everybody's got a different point of, where they want to be going or what they think we should be doing.
Yeah, and you've got, as university or college IT folks, you got multiple stakeholders. You got students, you got faculty, you got administration, you have legal stuff you have to do, and all of these things end up in these conflicts. And so I recommend actually going and looking, what are our hottest conflicts? What are the arguments that are really nasty? What are the discussions we're kind of afraid to have? And then going to your stakeholders and saying, okay, what information, what data would change your mind? because those conflicts are almost always either we have different perceptions of reality, we have different understandings of what actually is going on, and in most institutions that I've talked to, those are just straight up guesses, or we have different end goals. And you can't resolve those situations unless you explicitly say, okay, what do we not know? What should we need? What do we need to know to make a good decision? And then, all right, let's put all the desired end states on the table. And is there a way? And very frequently when you analyze the data, you end up having more free resources. You free up money, you free up time, you free up people. And then you can help accomplish all the different stakeholders, or many of the different stakeholders' end results, their goals.
Because up until that point, it's all anecdotal, right? You can have people on totally different sides of the spectrum who swear up and down that they're right.
We were talking to a school recently, and before they'd done the analysis, the science department swore that they had the most heavily used labs. But people who walked by the science labs on a bunch were like, there was nobody in there. And they were like, well, why does athletics have a lab? What does athletics need a lab for? And when they did the data analysis, they found out that the science labs were some of the least used labs on campus. And the athletics lab was one of the most heavily used labs on campus. And they were able to go, hey, we're not going to take your budget, biology, chemistry, sciences. Why don't you just consolidate your budget here? And then you can have this extra money to do, I think they bought some 3D printers. They started getting more, chemistry. Like
they don't need to maintain the labs and all the licenses for all of those, who knows how many computers they were able
I think they went from like 200-something labs, science computers, to like 50 really high-end ones with all the accessories they wanted. And everybody's happy because they were able to get the data, prove what was going on, and make database decisions.
Yeah. All right. So the data-oriented approach initially strikes me as a lot of work. Seems like something that's going to take heavy time investment. It's going to take a lot of commitment. What if I don't have time to dig into the data or to design the experiments I might need to design to see how accurate my data is or my assumptions are?
Yeah, it's a commitment. It definitely can be. For most people, they can get what they want out of it without a ton of extra time. For the basic, hey, is this being used, not being used? Reports work awesome. But we know you're asking more complex questions than that. We know that lots of users want more answers than they're getting. And there are people all over your campus who can help you get them. So I was at a institution recently, and I got talking to one of the professors. He's a data science professor. And the data science professor was like, I'm constantly struggling finding good, robust data sets that my students have any understanding of the context of.
Yeah, that they have that's tangible to them or that makes sense.
Yeah, that they can go and be like, situation. I understand what this data works for. And he's like, LabStats is an excellent example of a data set that my students understand. And so at that institution, you're able to go to the data science professor and be like, hey, here's a list of questions I've answered. Here's my exported data set. You'll come back to me at the end of the semester with some questions. Stuff from really basic stuff in entry-level courses like, hey, which labs should we be keeping open longer? Which ones should we be closing? What software is not used and unused? That kind of stuff. All the way to like really interesting, complicated questions like, what percentage of our stats software bill should be allocated to which department? Or some really interesting stuff like combining it with other data sets. You can ask questions like, how does the time students spend in SPSS, is that correlated with their grades? Is it the time that are the students who spend more time early on in the course doing better than the ones who crammed at the last minute?
And you can use that to make recommendations to help students be more successful.
Exactly. And so in that case, you can use data science students, or you could talk to grad students. You can give the data set to education grad students. We even had I've even met some interior design students who were redesigning labs, went in, studied the labs, looked at the baseline conditions, and then redesigned the labs to make the labs more accessible to students with disabilities. But their only way of measuring, they didn't know LabStats existed, their only way of measuring whether their changes were actually effective was by putting somebody in that lab for a few hours a week to do a head count with a piece of paper and a pencil. With LabStats, They could have had a much more robust information. Hey, when we moved the accessible machines to a more visible location, when we changed the size of the signs, when we moved the door handles, I think this is the stuff that they were doing, it increased accessible station use by 25% in terms of number of minutes.
And you could see that right away. You wouldn't just have, a few hours of data a week from the student who had time to go sit down and make marks and everything on the piece of paper. You would have had it 24/7.
Yep, you complete thing. And then that allows you to ask questions like, combine that with your student management system and ask questions like, what percentage of the time are my accessible stations being used by people who don't have, a registered disability? Are we providing a lot of benefits to students we don't know need these benefits?
Well, the vast majority of the people we work with anyway, they work at research institutions, right? And so there's any number of people there who find all kinds of uses for LabStats like this that might be outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you export it, you can strip out any information you don't want to share. You can control, you can anonymize it. You can do whatever you need to it.
The API.
Yep, you can do whatever you need to do with it to get that data to those folks. The other researchers that can be incredibly powerful are the analysts that already work at your school.
Yeah.
So in most schools I've talked to, when we get down to the operations level, somewhere in operations there's an analyst whose job is day in, day out, playing with Power BI or some other, business intelligence tool, doing exactly this. And most of them, when I talked to those analysts, didn't know LabStats existed. You're like, hey man, here's an enormous data set about a bunch of really expensive assets we own.
See what you can make of this.
Yeah. You want to spend some time with that?
Yes, please.
Yes. And because of LabFind, those changes, even if you're reducing a huge amount of the actual resources, don't have to negatively impact students in any way.
Yeah, students can use LabSigned to just pull up and say, oh, this, we've closed this lab, we didn't need it anymore, saved, who knows how many thousands of dollars on it. But then they can just go, okay, where's the next newest one that has the software I need?
Yeah. Yeah.
Next nearest, not newest.
And then we had an example recently at a major U.S. school where we looked at their lab usage over the summer, and they were paying for SPSS on every single machine. I think it was over 1,000 machines at $50 a month.
Yeah.
Over the summer semester, their max concurrent usage was 10. No more than 10 people.
No more than 10 at any given time.
Right. So 50 times that, that's $50,000 a month in wasted SPSS licenses.
When they could have been spending, what, 500 would have been enough?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's make it generous. Let's say, okay, the record is 10. The record is 10. We'll get 20 licenses. And instead of just putting it in every computer, we'll just tell people, hey, if you're looking for a specific piece of software, look it up on LabFind. And
I'm on this, this one lab or two labs or whatever.
Yep.
Where it makes the most sense.
Or just, hey, this one machine in every room, in every lab, has it installed. Okay. However you want to do it.
So, what if I was part of an organizational culture that did not value database decision making, or that was more kind of a make decisions more off the cuff kind of a thing? Will any of this work for me? Would I be able to change that culture going forward? How would somebody operate in that kind of a situation?
So when we talk about a data-driven organization, we're really talking about an organization that's accepted data as a tool, where they understand that data is the coin of the realm. And sometimes we get focused on the data, that the data is the thing. But people don't actually care about the data.
Right, because data is just the tool.
Yeah, they care about the data, the impact it has on their lives, the impact it has on their stakeholders' lives. And so if you really dig down and understand what your organization, what your boss and their boss care about, you can really find how data can help. So we hear about organizations that care about saving time or effort primarily. We care about organizations where there's a lot of personal drive for you personally being seen as an innovator. Mm-hmm. We run into people all the time who are just curious. They just want to know more. We run in institutions that really care about just helping students succeed. We have a lot of institutions that just want to free up their budget for something else.
Yeah.
hey, let's use this for staff. Let's use this for marketing. Let's use this, for whatever.
Could give the next great push if we
Yeah.
can just save $100,000.
Yep. They care about reducing risk, not being in a position to get sued, for example. And then a lot of people just care about, like, how do I make my job more secure? How do I be more indispensable here? And so with all of those, you can find a way that data applies to it. So data-driven organization makes it seem like someone cares about data. They don't. If you think you're in a place that doesn't care about data, figure out what they do care about. And you'll probably, once you've thought about that, be able to see how data can apply to that.
Well, data can be scary, too. I mean, it's...
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie. Like, data scares the stuffing out of a lot of people. Like, it really does. I was at a conference recently, and I was talking with a bunch of accessibility folks, and they legitimately were afraid that if we started tracking how people use accessible machines, that their institution would radically cut the budget for accessibility and just chop it. And, without knowing their leaders and their values, that wasn't a fear I could really deal with. But I think accessibility folks can really benefit from this. If you go out and you use LabFind and you find, hey, we have a bunch of accessibility resources that aren't being used, you have a whole further list of questions like, hey, do the people who need these accessible resources know they exist? Can they easily get to them? Are there hidden barriers that are keeping people from getting those accessible machines? Like the story with the interior designers.
Yeah.
Is the door handle at the wrong height or the sign in the wrong place?
Weird things, just...
Right?
You wouldn't think
Right.
that they make differences, but they do.
That prevent people from getting the accessible machines.
Right.
If you find that data, you're like, whoa, we know we have students. We know that 30% of students have one disability or another. Why aren't our resources for them being used? And you can start really going and publishing those resources using assets like LabFind, using assets like Lab Maps, using, reaching out campaigns, using your student assistants.
Or it's even like that school you were telling me about with the when it was finals week and everybody was lined up for that one lab that everybody knew existed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting case. So we went to a big school, and they're set up with a boulevard down the middle of their campus. And there's these big glass windows in their library that you can see a computer lab through. And the students, finals week, were lined up, I think, for 45 minutes. And they just renovated the building across the street, maybe 150 feet across the street. And there were 200 public computers in the basement of that building. And the student assistants were going up and down that line saying, hey, there's 200 machines in the lab over there. But those student assistants didn't have access to LabStats. They didn't know the real-time availability, and so nobody was willing to take the risk.
Right, because there's sunk cost in how long you've been in that line.
Right, and it's the gambler's fallacy or the sunk cost fallacy. Like, I'm not going to take the risk and leave this line and walk across. Reality, most of the people in that line could have walked across and been done their print job or whatever they needed to do in 5 or 10 minutes and be gone.
But nobody knew.
So by providing data to students, they could radically change their experience.
Yeah, something like LabFind would have been like, oh my goodness, there's all these other labs. I'm just going to go take care of this here, be done.
We have a lot of talk on campuses now about improving student success and student experience, and even stuff like student mental health. And we look for big sweeping solutions for all those things. But it's really like, okay, what are the little annoying features of being a student that we can get rid of?
Because that frees up, mental capacity to deal with bigger things.
Time, effort, stress, all those go down when you can find the resources you need fast.
Okay. So, as a product manager here at LabStats, I'm assuming you have to guess, obviously.
Yep.
Under what circumstances do you find that to be acceptable?
So when we get to the decision, we go, okay, how confident are we that we know what's going on here? What data do we have? That's literally the question we ask. What data do we have to suggest that this is the right course of action? Okay, we don't have very much, or we have low confidence. Then the next question we ask is, okay, if we waited to do an experiment or gather the data to have a higher confidence level, to get this right, would that end up being cheaper than just being wrong? And sometimes you're like, you know what? It's cheaper to just be wrong. This decision needs to get made now.
Right, we have to make this now. It's better if we're just, rather than spend all the time, let's just get moving.
Yeah. The other thing that happens quite a bit is the cost of the research itself. is more expensive than being wrong in a different way. So, yeah, the cost of not making decisions too high is the cost of not making decisions low enough that it's worth just taking a gamble, or the cost of getting the data is higher than the cost of being wrong.
Okay.
But when we do that, I like to say, okay, let's not treat this as a done decision. How do we cheaply, efficiently, easily track the results of this decision and treat this like an A/B test?
Yeah, make sure you notate that it's a guess.
It's a guess.
This is me guessing.
This is
I'm
our guess.
probably wrong.
These are our assumptions.
I just don't know how yet.
All models are wrong, right?
Right.
Some are still useful. So we're wrong. We know we're wrong. Okay, how do we track and figure out how we're wrong and how wrong we were? And very often it's like, hey, can we make this decision for only half of the people? Can we set this up as an A/B test? We'll make this decision and half the customers will get this feature and half won't. Or half will get this message, half won't. A bunch of you got a message from me, or probably not you guys, but people who recently left the company got a message from me being like, hey, tell me why you left. And half of them got one message and half of them got another message. And I just counted to see which ones got better responses.
Okay. Just simple tests as you're going.
Simple tests all the time. Like, can I turn this into a test instead of a guess?
Okay. Interesting. And so when what kind of things have you seen customers do with LabStats data that has surprised you? I know we've mentioned the interior design situation.
Yep.
Are there any others that have just come out of left field and like, wow, I didn't even think about that?
I had assumed when we started and going through the product and kind of talking that LabStats was mostly used for purposes of like big financial efficiency. What software do I buy or not buy? What computers do I buy or not buy? What labs?
Which is kind of one of our initial pitches, right?
Right. And when I started talking to people who use the product, a ton of people were using it to just day-to-day manage their labs. So they were doing stuff like one lab manager had written a little website that used our API that showed students, his student workers, which computers hadn't checked in. It's like, hey, these are all the computers that haven't checked in.
These would be like the lab assistants, right?
Yeah. Hey, lab assistants, when you get to work. And he was one of these guys, like many of you are, one lab manager with like 150 or 200 student employees, right? Most of which he didn't even see every week because they had different schedules and were in different parts of campus. So he was like, hey, when you get to work, open this website. Here's a list of computers that haven't checked in. Here's a list of ones that people have been logged in for a really long time. Go check those and
make sure they're working.
Make sure they're working and just click on the website and tell me.
Yeah.
That was a really cool use. Another one, we were at a campus and they were the same thing. He had one part-time assistant, like 20 hours a week, and everybody else who worked for him was like 8 hours or less, and there were hundreds of them. And they had campuses spread out over, I think the farthest lab was like 5 miles away. And so the way he knew that his people were going to work on time is he'd set up a little report that ran a report that showed in the stations that the lab assistants were supposed to check in. So he could see
if their users had checked in and what time they would have checked in every day.
What time they checked in.
On time, he could see.
And at the beginning of every shift, whoever was managing those people would just click on that and be like, yep, they're all in their seats or not. Oh, so-and-so's not in their seat. Give them a phone call. Not a use I'd ever thought of, but just a really efficient way of managing all kinds of people. And we really think, one of my assumptions right now, one of my guesses, is that lab assistants are a potential thing I should be making LabFind or LabStats and LabFind work better for. That there's all these people who are intermediary between the students and the instructors and the lab managers who could also use access to some parts of LabFind and LabStats.
And it really causes us to look at LabStats a different way of going, hey, we've got this incredibly robust piece of software that turns out could be used for a million different things. Just making all of these guesses, these decision processes a lot easier for people.
Yeah, and so the way I'm trying to get around guessing is I'm trying to go and watch what people do.
Yeah.
So we were in Portland for a week last month. I'm heading to the UK and Ireland.
Pretty soon, right?
Yeah, the end of this week for 2 weeks to go around and spend time on 6 different campuses and just watch how people do their jobs. Because we have the data about how people use our product, but that only tells us what they're doing. It doesn't tell us why they're doing it.
Right.
So
what's the process then of what you're doing with product at LabStats right now?
So we're trying to combine the quantitative and the qualitative. So our goal is to deliver the most value to people who pay for our product. Like, really simply, we want everybody to pay for our product to be like, that was totally worth every penny I spent on it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Just for the support guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, just us.
Yeah.
We were worth it.
You were worth it. Well, I mean, unfortunately, not everybody can spend as much time with you as they'd like to. And so it's hard to extract the value. But
Oh, poor them.
yeah. But so we're trying to get at them as much value as possible to people who own LabStats. And so in the context of that goal, we're trying to go and understand what is valuable. And not just, understanding computers and software is valuable. Okay, what else do you value? Do you value student success? Do you value knowing that you have the right accessible machines? Do you value, in some cases, do you value knowing your student athletes spent the right amount of time and are eligible to play in the basketball game?
Which LabStats could totally tell you.
Yeah, and we have people using it for that. And so trying to understand all of that value, to have the stories, the qualitative stuff, to help us put the numbers we can see about how many reports people run and how many times people log in into context.
Okay. And so, I mean, talk to me then a little bit about the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and how does that relate with, what's the other word? Anecdotal.
Right. So, the plural of anecdote is not data. We had an example here where I asked my outside sales team and my inside support team a pretty simple question. And I said, how many of the people you talked to recently have people in their labs all the time? And one of the teams said 100.
Lab assistants.
Lab
right?
assistants,
Okay.
lab managers, somebody who works for them in the labs all the time. And one of the people said 100%, and one of the guys said 0.
And these guys, they talk with customers
all
the
the
time.
But because of humans do a really, really, really bad job of remembering quantitative data like that. They're just bad
Right.
at it.
We're anecdotal by nature.
Yeah, I went to some training recently where they went out and it was like one of those micro job sites where they give little jobs out to people, and they asked their workers how many hours they worked last week and what their average length of session was, and not a single one of the respondents was within 30% of their actual number. Everybody was off. When you ask people stuff like that, it's not their fault. It's not that they're dumb. People are just bad at numbers like that. If you want more on that, there's an awesome book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by a Nobel Prize winner named Daniel Kahneman. That I highly,
about that
I highly recommend. In fact, we bought a copy for the office.
Oh, okay.
I highly recommend everybody read. So that's anecdote. Qualitative data is stories, basically. Lots and lots and lots of people's stories. And not the stories you remember, the stories you have recorded, written down.
Okay.
So if you're ever talking to me, I'll probably be like, hey, can I record this? And that's not because I'm trying to be creepy. It's because I know I'm bad at remembering and summarizing stuff like that.
Because that takes it out of that anecdotal phase
And it turns it
into something that's much more hard.
Here's
evidence.
a story, here's a quote I can actually share. So when we're making up projects for the engineering team, we actually take quotes from those conversations and drop them in the user story that the engineering team uses as their work order.
Okay.
Customer said this.
I've notated a few of those.
The customer's problem is this in exact quotes. And if I have even if I have an audio recording, I'll link to it. Like, hey, engineer, listen to the person say this in their own words. I'm not making this up. This isn't. And I'll have a bunch of them. Like, here's 5 different customers who said similar things. When we design a solution, it has to solve all these problems. Okay. So that's quantitative. And then qualitative is anything with a number. Anything I can throw into a graph, anything I can throw into a spreadsheet.
That's the space where LabStats lives.
That's the space where LabStats lives on our end. Right, exactly. Yep. And it's also, our tools that run LabStats allow us to look at data across a whole bunch of schools and a whole bunch of users. So we have that data as well. Okay. Yeah.
So what do you think then schools' goals are? What are, and how does that influence your product decisions that you make?
So this is one of the huge questions I'm trying to not jump to conclusions on. I'm trying to realize we think we know, but we can always use more data. And so if you want to share this with us right now in the chat, that would be awesome.
Because we don't want to guess.
We don't want to guess. Yeah, I don't want to guess. We run across a lot of schools that care about financial efficiency. So saving money, finding waste, making sure that the money they're spending is associated with the correct amount of usage. Somebody put it like, hey, our computers are funded by the students. They have an IT charge in their tuition. We want to be able to go to them every semester and be like, you guys gave us this much money. This is how many people used our services for how many seconds, right? Improve the student experience. So a lot of schools care about reducing student complaints. Like, just let's get the complaint numbers down. And then something that's emerging is understanding lead indicators of student success. So
that's where you were talking about the SPSS, usage, and does that correlate with, it might not be causation, but does it correlate with, success in
right? And wouldn't it be great to be able to go into your first day of stats class and the instructor's like, listen, people who spend 5 hours a week or more in SPSS typically get A's in this course.
They trend a little bit better.
Yeah, if you want to get an A in this course, you need to be spending probably about this much time in the product, in the software,
Because schools can tell you that about credit hours,
right,
all day long.
Yeah,
but not necessarily how those credit hours are
used. And we see a lot of people like, oh, we're going to use success in this semester to predict success in the next semester. But by the time a student's done poorly in one semester, that's already impacted their life.
Right.
That's changed their options for grad school. That's changed their options for graduating from that program, for example. Wouldn't it be great to be able to go in early, like a mid-year thing, and say, hey, you're enrolled in Arabic. We have this Arabic software on the computers. You haven't been in it very much. You're probably not going to do great unless you go spend a bunch more time.
Try using that.
Yeah.
And that again, that doesn't have to be on, getting that data. It doesn't have to be on the IT guys or the guys who typically use LabStats.
No.
Let the language professor have a crack at it.
Yeah, one of the things I don't think we emphasize enough about LabStats is that we have an unlimited number of user licenses.
Yeah. Your price isn't going to go up for adding more users.
If you want every department to be able to see their own computers and the usage of all their own computers, you can totally do that. It doesn't cost you an extra penny. If somebody's arguing that you did the math wrong, be like one of my favorite customers, one of our customers, and be like, here you go. Here's LabStats. Here's a LabStats access. Show me how I did the math wrong.
Yeah. And not necessarily in a bad way. Just like, hey, if I'm wrong, show me.
Yeah, double check it. You go check it yourself.
Here's the tool.
And then so improving the student experience, and then something that's up and coming is reducing risk. So if you have concerns about a particular piece of software, if you have concerns about, hey, we need to make sure that we're meeting ADA regulations, or NCAA, we need to make sure that those student athletes are getting their study time in, and we need a record of it that we can go back to.
Right.
Any of those kinds of situations, LabStats is really useful for. But I know there's more. There's more stuff we haven't even thought about. And
even like managing staff and stuff like that.
Yeah, that whole staff management thing. Like, how do we help with that? How do we make that easier? How do we not have to make you do a custom report? Can we create an alert? These are the things I think about all the time. How do we make this better? Right.
Yeah. So what other data sources then, if people have something specific they want to do, what other data sources can you combine LabStats with?
This is really interesting. The big one, the first one, is student management systems. So your student management systems has a huge amount of data about every student, right? What their major is, sometimes their financial records, inventory records, financial records, background. And so a lot of schools have goals like, hey, we want Pell Grant students to have a higher graduation rate. We want people who are first-generation students to have a higher graduation rate. We are planning on attracting a whole bunch more international students because they pay us more. How do international students use our computing resources differently than local students? And so by combining those sets, so one of the ways to do that is set up automatic user tag updates. So you get your student management system to populate a spreadsheet that you then import to LabStats, and that creates automatic user tags. And a couple of our really big campuses are doing this. And so every week,
you could do major, you could do year, you could do any piece of information that you can export from that.
And you can combine that with anonymization. Like, you don't have to have the student's name in there to still do that. You can have an anonymous identifier that you can tie that stuff back to. So there are ways to do that. And you can get this really rich understanding of who's using the resource and understanding the different groups of students. One of the things we found out on this last campus visit, that most instructors across the United States, most classes are actually taught by contract instructors. So, and contract instructors typically don't get offices. So a lot of those contract instructors were doing their office hours in computer labs. And one of the major uses of some of the more specialized computer labs was contract instructors using them for office hours.
That's interesting.
How many hours is that? Is it worth setting up special labs,
Does
special
it justify
cubicles?
getting some special, how much time are they spending in the lab? Can we find a specific spot for them to go to?
We find, with international students, when we go into labs very frequently, we see international students using the labs at a much higher rate than local students. And for every international student actually logged in, there's often 3 or 4 or 5 working as a group studying together, coming from cultures that are a little more communal, that are working together. And so that's one of those places where you want to combine your quantitative. And so you can use your records from your Wi-Fi system to know how many people are in your computer lab, and then look at your LabStats records of how many people are logged in and be like, on average, there's 2 or 3 times as many people in our computer labs as we have people logged in.
Because they're all using Wi-Fi on a personal device.
We're all on a personal device working as a group with one person logged in.
Or that too.
Right?
Interesting.
And so those are the kinds of things you can combine it with. A lot of schools combine it with inventory information. What do we own? Okay, what do we own? What are we paying for it? What do we owe on it? What's its tax status? All that financial
stuff.
stuff.
Refreshing it.
Right, and then combine that with how old is it, which is in LabStats, or can be in LabStats. How often is it used? Where is it? We had a really huge school that had just been a bunch of schools that just combined, and when they installed LabStats, you probably remember this, they came back to us and went, yeah, so LabStats installed on like 5,000 more machines than we thought we owned.
I do remember that.
We were like,
that means you'll need more licenses for a little bit while you clean this up.
Right, and they're like, we don't know, and this school was over, I think they're spread over almost 1 million square miles.
Ooh, man.
And we were like,
yeah,
let's help you figure that out. So you can combine it, and then we know some schools are plugged right into the financial systems as well.
So we talked a little bit earlier about anecdotal, quantitative, and qualitative data. Where would you put the balance? What do you want before you feel comfortable in your data set?
So I use anecdotes to be like, that's an interesting story. Is that worth checking out? If that was when I do it, hear an anecdote, I have to ask if that was a general experience or a very common experience. What would I like to do? What would change
how much would I care about it?
Yeah, how much would I care, right? And then you're like, all right, that anecdote, if that's a common experience, that's a bad situation. Okay, how do I find out if that's a common experience?
And that's where qualitative
comes in. And then to get at why. Why are people doing that? Why do people have that behavior? You need quantitative. And that comes down to talking to people who are there, talking to the users, talking to your help staff, and having them record it, write it down as it's happening.
Okay.
So that's the balance. Going back to that situation with the computer lab in the library that was full with the 200 empty machines across the street. In LabStats, we could see this lab was at, I think the labs in the new building were at like 5% utilization, and the labs in the library were at 100%. We could see that data in LabStats. But we didn't know why until we went and talked to the lab attendants. And they're like, yeah, we kept walking up and down the row of people waiting in their labs being like, hey, there are empty labs over there, and no one would leave.
But nobody would go, yeah.
Right, and we're like, oh, the reason why is they don't have enough data. They don't have real-time availability, so they're not leaving.
Okay. So what kind of data then LabStats have? We talked a little bit about it, that it really falls into the quantitative state because it's numbers.
Yeah, but it's hardware. What do I own?
Mm-hmm.
What's getting turned on? What's getting powered off? Software. What software and websites are being used? What users are using what? And then time. At what time? And space. Where? And so it's all 5 of those.
And so the original goal was the hardware, the software, and the users.
But you have to have time
and
data.
You got time and space
time data,
came out of
right?
That.
And then as we were grouping computers, because they're grouped in labs, they started getting space, and then we're adding more space elements.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of obsessed with geographic information systems and how to show data in space.
I hear that every once in a while.
Yeah,
It comes up.
It comes up, right? But all that information's in there, so you can do stuff like, okay, why, like that example with the full labs and the empty labs? Why is one full and empty? Going and walking back and forth between them, looking at the sight lines, understanding, oh, it's not visible that it's empty, that kind of stuff.
Okay. And what if we don't necessarily have access to these other data sets we've talked about?
Just go find the people who own them. If you think it'll benefit your school's values, go find the people who manage or analyze, who do analysis based on those data sets, and be like, hey, do you know we have this other data set?
People who might be able to use it.
Yep. If they know LabStats exists, they're going to be like, that's a much better way of making these decisions.
Okay.
And people really are really successful using tools like Power BI and other BI tools to do really deep dives, combining a whole bunch of multiple data sets. And more schools are having that capability.
Okay. One other thing I want to mention here, we do have, again, we've mentioned a little bit here, Schofield, our account manager, and Bree. Schofield does lots of walkthroughs, more in-depth training on how to do things within LabStats. He's really good at that. So you can always reach out to Schofield, and his email, schofield@labstats.com, SCHOFIELD. Yeah, I think I got that right. You can also reach out to us in the support department. Support@labstats.com might be easier to remember. Scott and I can always direct your question or your concern to wherever it needs to go. So I don't know that we have any other questions at the moment or not. Well, I guess we're at time anyways here. So if you have any more questions, we will. If there are any questions we missed, we will get to those. John loves to reach out and integrate with people. Please reach out to him or to us or to anybody here if you have any questions. And let us know if there's anything we can help you with, all right? We'll talk to y'all later. Hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your week, and hope to see you next time.